The fire crackled in the stone hearth, throwing long shadows across the walls of Mountain Haven's main hall. Outside, snow fell soft and steady, covering the West Virginia mountains in silence. The year was 1920, and the world had just finished tearing itself apart. Ethan Wolfe sat in his leather chair, older now at 70, his hair silver and his face a map of hard winters and harder choices. The wooden cross in his weathered hands caught the firelight, its surface worn smooth from 35 years of being held touched, remembered. Across from him, his grandson Daniel stood near the window in his army uniform, all pressed wool and polished buttons, 18 years old. The boy would board a train at dawn, bound for Europe, bound for war. Daniel's voice was quiet. "Grandfather, I'm afraid I won't be brave enough when it matters." Ethan looked at the cross, then at his grandson. In the doorway behind Daniel, Claire appeared. She was 63 now, her hair gray but her eyes still sharp, still carrying that strength that came from surviving the unsurvivable. She nodded once at Ethan, then disappeared down the hall to check on the women sleeping in the dormitory rooms. 23 of them tonight. 23 more who had found their way to this place. Ethan turned the cross over in his hands. "Before you go, let me tell you about real courage. It started with a woman who thought she was worth nothing and a blizzard that should have killed her." Daniel sat down. "This was 1885, Ethan said. "I was 35 years old and living alone on this mountain, hiding from what I'd done in the Cold Wars. I'd stopped believing in miracles, stopped believing in much of anything." The old man's eyes went distant, looking back through 35 years. "Then one night in December, someone knocked on my door. The wind didn't just move across the mountain peaks. It hunted. It tore through the valleys with teeth of ice scraping the earth raw and pushing cold deep into the bones of anything caught beneath its fury. The temperature had dropped to 15 below zero. The wind screamed at 40 miles per hour, turning snowflakes into bullets of frozen water. Through that wind, a small figure moved. Sister Claire Ashford stumbled through snow that reached her knees. She was 28 years old, though the 4 days of walking had aged her beyond counting. Her gray habit was torn, and mud stained the fabric, frozen stiff against her body. Her shoes had given out 2 days ago, the soles separating completely from the uppers. Now her feet were bare, bleeding, turning the color of old meat. She couldn't feel her toes anymore. That was probably mercy. In her arms, she clutched a wooden cross. It was all she had left from a life she was running from. The cross was simple, handmade from ash wood, not the ornate kind that came from wealthy churches. Someone had carved it with care, with love, before everything went wrong. She held it now like an anchor, the only solid thing in a world that had become nothing but cold and wind and the desperate rhythm of one foot in front of the other. Behind her, somewhere in the storm, she knew they were searching. She had heard the dogs on the second day, their barking carried on the wind like a promise of capture. Brother Malcolm Cross did not let his property escape easily, and that's what she was to him. Property, a commodity, something to be sold to the highest bidder under the thin veneer of holy matrimony. If they caught her, she would never be free again. Claire knew what Malcolm did to women who tried to leave. She had seen it. She had heard the screams echoing from the cellar beneath the chapel. She had watched Sister Emma Blake return from her failed escape attempt 3 years ago, her wrists rope burned and her eyes dead. 2 weeks later, they found Emma in the river. Drowned, they said. An accident, they said. But Claire had seen Emma's body before they took it away. The bruises around her throat, the marks on her wrists, those weren't from falling. The blizzard had saved Claire's life so far, covering her tracks, hiding her path in fresh snow every few hours. But the cold was killing her slowly. She could feel hypothermia setting in stage 2, maybe worse. Her thoughts were getting fuzzy. Her movements were slowing. Soon she would simply lie down in the snow and not get up. Her knee hit the ground hard. The fall was sudden, her legs refusing to carry her another step. A cry rose in her throat, but she swallowed it down. Crying wasted warmth. Crying wasted water. She pushed herself up, hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped the cross. Then she saw it. Just ahead through the curtain of snow. A thin ribbon of smoke rising into the gray sky. Where there was smoke, there was fire. Where there was fire, there was shelter. Claire forced her legs to move. One step, then another. Her body screamed protest, but she ignored it. She had learned to ignore her body over 2 years at New Eden Ministry. Learned to separate mind from flesh, when the flesh was being used, being hurt, being sold. The shape of a cabin emerged from the gloom. Rough-hewn logs weathered to iron gray. A small corral with two horses, their heads down against the wind. No other buildings nearby. No neighbors. No witnesses. She had no idea if the person inside would help her or harm her. But at least it wasn't the open mountain. At least it was a chance. She reached the door. There was no porch, just a single flat stone dragged into place as a step. Her hand hovered over the rough wood, trembling. This was the moment, the choice. Knock and face whatever came next, or turn back into the storm and let the cold finish what it had started. Claire knocked. The sound was barely a whisper against the howling wind. She waited, teeth chattering, so hard her jaw ached. Nothing. No response. Maybe no one was home. Maybe the smoke was from a banked fire in an empty cabin. She knocked again, harder, using the last of her strength. Her voice came out as a rasp, almost too quiet to hear even to herself. Please. A latch clicked. The door opened, slowly pulled inward. Orange firelight spilled out into the gray afternoon. A tall man filled the frame, blocking most of the light. He wore a heavy wool coat and a battered hat pulled low. In his right hand, held easy but ready, was a Winchester rifle. The model 1873 she registered distantly. Her father had owned one. She knew the weight of it, the way it balanced. The man didn't speak. He just looked. His face was a map of hard miles. Mid-30s, she guessed. Wind and sun had carved deep lines around his eyes and mouth. A thick beard covered the lower half of his face, and his dark hair was long, tied back with leather cord. A scar cut from his temple, down into the beard, the kind of scar that came from violence. His eyes were deep blue, dark as a winter sky, and utterly unreadable. He was built like his nickname she would learn later. Like a bear, shoulders broad as a doorframe, hands large and scarred from work wrapped around that rifle, with the casual competence of someone who knew exactly how to use it. He didn't move at first. His eyes scanned past her, looking at the trail behind, searching the tree line, looking for a husband, a posse, trouble. Finding nothing but the barren plains and falling snow, he looked back at her torn habit, at her bleeding hands, at her blue lips and bare frozen feet. Something flickered in his expression, not pity, maybe recognition, maybe resignation, the look of a man who knew what it meant to run. He stepped back an inch and lowered the rifle. Come in before you let all the heat out. His voice was like gravel under a wagon wheel, deep, rough. The voice of a man who didn't waste words. Claire stumbled inside, her legs buckled, and she pitched forward. He didn't catch her, but he grabbed her arm to steady her against the doorframe. His grip was firm, careful, the touch of someone who knew his own strength and how to control it. Sit. He nodded toward a small table near the cast-iron stove. The cabin was a single room. Clean, sparse, warm. The stove glowed in the corner, filling the space with blessed heat that hit her like a physical force. A narrow bed was pushed against the far wall. Saddles hung from pegs. Everything was functional. Everything was simple. This was the home of a man who needed very little from the world. He handed her a tin cup of cold water. She drank greedily, coughing as she swallowed. The water hurt going down her raw throat, but she finished it anyway. He ladled hot stew into a chipped bowl and set it before her without a word. Rabbit and root vegetables, the smell of it nearly making her cry. Eat slow, he said. She tried, but hunger made it impossible. Her hands shook as she lifted the spoon. The stew was simple, but it was the best thing she had ever tasted. Wild onion, turnips, meat from something he'd trapped himself. The food of a man who lived off the land. When she finished, he finally asked the question. Where did you come from? Silver Ridge. Her voice was barely a whisper. That's 3 days walking, maybe 4. He studied her with those unreadable blue eyes. In good weather. She stared at her bleeding knuckles. I had nowhere else to go. He watched her the way a scout reads trail signs, the bruises on her wrists fading yellow-green but still visible, the way she flinched when he shifted his weight, the way she kept her eyes down except when she looked at the door checking for pursuit. You're running from something, he said. It wasn't a question. Claire didn't answer. She couldn't. Not yet. The words were too heavy, the truth too big. The man sighed and crossed his arms. The firelight caught the hard planes of his face, softening them just slightly. For a moment, he looked almost approachable. "Name's Ethan Wolf," he said. "Most folks used to call me Bear." Claire looked up at that. Bear. It fit. He was built like one. Strong, solid, dangerous if provoked. But there was something else in his eyes. Something tired. Something that understood running. "Claire," she whispered. "Sister Claire Ashford." Ethan's eyes flicked to the wooden cross she still clutched in one hand. He nodded once as if that explained everything. "You can sleep here tonight," he said, "but tomorrow morning you head for the stage road. I'll point you where to go." Her stomach dropped. The stage road was 2 days on foot. She wouldn't survive it. Not in this cold, not in her condition. She needed to stay. She needed warmth, food, shelter. And she had nothing to trade except the one thing men always wanted. She stood, legs trembling. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She had to try. She had to offer the only thing she had left. "Mr. Wolf," her voice cracked. He looked up from the fire. She took a breath. The words came out quiet but clear. "I'm not worth much, but I'll do anything for a roof over my head." The room went still. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. Ethan's jaw tightened. His hands balled into fists at his sides. For a moment, Claire thought he might throw her out into the storm. Instead, his voice came low and sharp, cutting through the silence like a blade. "No, not here." And the look in his eyes was not desire. It was anger. Anger at the world that had made her believe that was all she was worth. Claire felt tears burn her eyes. She sank back into the chair, covering her face with her hands. She had been so certain, so sure that this was how the world worked. You gave men what they wanted, and they let you survive another day. But this man, this stranger with the scarred hands and the tired eyes, had refused her. "You don't understand," she said, her voice breaking. "I have nothing else." "Nothing." Ethan moved to the stove, his back to her. He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, gentler. "You have yourself. That's more than nothing. And you don't owe me anything for a night's shelter. A person either gives it or doesn't." Claire lowered her hands and looked at him. Really looked. The set of his shoulders, the way he kept his distance, giving her space. The old rosary hanging on the wall, the beads worn smooth from years of prayers. This was not a man who took what he wanted. This was a man who carried his own ghosts. She wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. Why would you help me?" Ethan turned to face her. The firelight cast shadows across his face, making him look older, sadder. "Because someone should have helped you a long time ago," he said. "And nobody did." He gestured to the bed. "You take that. I'll sleep in the chair." Claire shook her head. "I'll sleep on the floor." "Not in this cold. Take the bed." She hesitated, then stood slowly and crossed to the narrow cot. It was firm, clean-smelling, faintly of cedar. Not the smell of cheap perfume and stale cigars she had grown used to at New Eden Ministry. She sat lightly on the corner, unsure if she had the right. Ethan dropped into the wooden chair near the door. He rested one boot on the lower rung, leaning back like a man who had done this every night for years. His rifle leaned against the wall within arm's reach. "You don't have to stay awake," Claire said quietly. "I do." "Why?" "Because someone knocked on my door in the middle of a storm and told me she was willing to give up her dignity just for a roof." His voice was calm, almost too calm. "So I'm keeping watch for both of us." Claire stared at the floorboards. Her cheeks might burn with shame. "I didn't know what else to offer." "You shouldn't have to offer anything," he said. "Shelter is shelter. A person either gives it or doesn't." She lay back on the bed, pulling the thin blanket over herself. Exhaustion pulled her down fast, dragging her into the first real sleep she had known in days. Her last thought before darkness took her was that she shouldn't have survived this long. Maybe she was only alive because she had reached this cabin, this man, instead of another. The storm grew louder through the night. Wind pushed against the cabin walls as if trying to rip them apart. Loose snow hissed along the window frame. But inside, by the glow of the fire, Claire slept. And Ethan watched just as he said he would. Morning came slow and gray. Claire woke to the sound of an axe biting into wood. She sat up disoriented for a moment before remembering where she was. The cabin was empty. She looked out the small window and saw Ethan outside splitting logs with steady, powerful strokes. Sweat gleamed on his forehead despite the cold. His coat was off, and she could see the breadth of his shoulders, the strength in his arms, as the double-bit axe came down again and again, each strike perfectly placed in the grain. He moved with the efficiency of someone who had done this work 1,000 times before. No wasted motion, no hesitation, just the rhythm of work, the kind that kept a man alive through winter. Beside him, hanging from a wooden frame, was a deer, freshly killed and dressed. A white tail, maybe 150 pounds dressed weight. He had gone hunting while she slept. For her. Ethan glanced up and saw her at the window. He gave a single nod of acknowledgement, then set the axe down and walked toward the cabin. When he stepped inside, he brought the cold with him, along with a smell of iron and snow and honest sweat. "Mornin'," he said. "Hope I didn't wake you." "No," Claire's voice was quiet. "Thank you for the bed." "Only one I got. I slept in the chair just fine." He nodded toward the rocking chair near the fire. Ethan moved to the small stove and began making breakfast. He mixed flour and water for pancakes using what she recognized as sourdough starter from a tin canister. A man who knew how to make food last. He poured the batter into a cast iron pan over the fire. His movements were practiced, methodical. This was a man who had lived alone for a long time. Claire stood, her legs still unsteady. "I should help." Ethan didn't turn around. "You should sit. You walked through a blizzard. Your body needs rest." "I can't just sit while you do everything." He turned then, his blue eyes meeting hers. His gaze was steady, serious but kind. "Sister, I'm not asking you to sit because I think you're useless. I'm asking because you're hurt. There's a difference." Claire stopped. No one had spoken to her like that in a very long time. Like she was a person. Not a burden, not property, just a person who deserved rest. She sat back down. They ate in silence. The pancakes were simple but good. Claire ate slowly, savoring each bite. Ethan ate with the efficiency of someone who saw food as fuel, nothing more. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that came from two people who understood that words were not always necessary. Finally, Claire spoke. "You live here alone. 5 years now. By choice." Ethan paused, his fork hovering over his plate. Then he set it down. "By necessity." Claire looked at him. "I understand that." He met her gaze, and for a moment something passed between them. Recognition. Two people who had both run from something, and two people who carried weight they couldn't put down. Ethan shifted the subject, his voice lighter. "Your boots are done for. Can't walk anywhere in those." Claire looked down. Her boots were ruined, the soles completely separated from the uppers. She hadn't even noticed. "I noticed," she said, and to her surprise she smiled, just a little. Ethan's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "I got an old pair that might fit. They're not pretty, but they'll keep your feet attached to your legs." Claire's smile widened. "That's very specific." "Mountain life. You learn to appreciate the basics." For the first time in days, Claire laughed. It was a small sound, barely more than a breath, but it felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Ethan stood and walked to a wooden trunk in the corner. He pulled out a pair of worn leather boots and brought them to her. They were too big, but with extra socks, they would work. "Thank you," she said. He nodded and turned back to the stove. Claire looked around the cabin more carefully now. It was clean but sparse, functional. No decorations except for the rosary on the wall. It was old, the beads worn smooth from use. Handmade, probably. The crucifix at the end was simple wood, similar to the cross she carried. "Your rosary?" she asked, gesturing to it. Ethan followed her gaze. "My mother's. She passed 3 years back." "I'm sorry." "She was a good woman. Prayed for me every day, even when I didn't deserve it." He paused. "Especially then." Claire's voice softened. "I think that's what mothers do." Ethan looked at her. "You got family, sister?" Claire's face fell. The light that had been there a moment ago dimmed. "I had a sister, Grace. She died 2 years ago." "I'm sorry." They sat in silence again, but this time it was heavier, weighted with shared grief. Claire looked down at the wooden cross in her lap. "I became a nun to find a meaning after she was gone. To save others." She gave a bitter laugh. "Didn't work out the way I planned." Ethan didn't push. He just waited. Rarely does, he said finally. Later that morning, Ethan went outside to continue his work. Claire stayed inside, but she couldn't sit still. She looked around the cabin and saw his coat hanging by the door. The shoulder was torn, the fabric frayed. She found his sewing kit, a simple bachelor's collection of needle and thread, and sat down to mend it. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency. She had learned to sew as a girl, and later working in the settlement houses of Baltimore, she had mended countless garments for families who couldn't afford new ones. The stitches were small and even, professional. She used a blanket stitch for durability, keeping the tension consistent. When Ethan came back inside, he saw the coat. He picked it up, examining the repair. The torn shoulder was now stronger than it had been before. "You did this?" Claire looked up nervous. "I hope you don't mind. I just needed to do something useful." Ethan ran his fingers over the stitches. "This is good work. Real good." He looked at her. "Where did you learn?" "My mother taught me before she left." Celeste paused. "And I worked in a settlement house in Baltimore. You learn to make things last." Ethan put the coat on. It fit better than it ever had. "Thank you," he said, and he meant it. Claire felt something warm settle in her chest. For the first time in 2 years, she felt useful, valued, not just as a body to be used, but as a person with skills, with worth. "You strong enough to walk a bit?" Ethan asked. "I think so." "We need to check my traps. Could use an extra pair of hands if you're willing." Claire was surprised. He wasn't treating her like an invalid. He was treating her like a partner. "Yes," she said. "I'd like that." They walked through the snowy forest together. Ethan moved with the easy confidence of someone who knew this land like the back of his hand. He showed her how to read tracks in the snow. Deer, rabbit, wolf. He pointed out edible plants hidden beneath the white. Wild onion, cattail roots. He explained how to set traps, how to check them without leaving scent. Claire found herself learning quickly. She had always been observant. It was a skill she had developed working with families in poverty. You learned to see the details. Who was really hungry? Who was being hurt? Who needed help but wouldn't ask? "See that?" Ethan pointed to a tree trunk. Bark scratched vertical, bear marking territory. "How recent?" Claire asked. Ethan looked at her, impressed by the question. "Good question." He examined the tree closer. "Sap still fresh, maybe 2 days." Claire nodded, filing the information away. "You got sharp eyes," Ethan said. "I was trained to observe in my old work." "What kind of work?" "I helped families in poverty. Lots of them. You learn to see details." Ethan looked at her with new respect. "That's important work." "It was," Claire said quietly, "until I thought I could do more good in a convent." They reached one of Ethan's traps. There was a rabbit inside, already dead. Ethan removed it quickly and cleanly, resetting the trap with practiced hands. The trap was a simple wire snare positioned perfectly on a game trail. Claire watched without flinching. "Most city folk can't stomach this part," Ethan said. "I've seen worse," Claire said. Her voice was flat. "Much worse." Ethan stopped. He turned to look at her. Really look at her. "Who are you running from, sister?" Claire's face hardened. The moment of peace shattered. She was silent for a long time, staring at the snow. "People who called themselves holy," she said finally, "but used God's name to do the devil's work." Ethan's jaw tightened. Anger flickered in his eyes. "Sounds like Cole Boston I used to know. Different collar, same evil." Claire looked at him sharply. "You worked for coal companies." Ethan met her eyes, unflinching, honest. "I did, as an enforcer, beat men who were just trying to feed their families. One of them died because of me." His voice was rough. "That's why I'm up here. Penance." Claire studied him. There was no judgment in her eyes, only understanding. "Do you think penance works, that we can be forgiven?" Ethan looked at the mountains, at the endless white stretching in every direction. "I don't know about forgiveness, but I know we can try to do better." Claire nodded slowly. "Then maybe there's hope for both of us." They walked back to the cabin in silence. But it was a different silence now. The silence of two people who had seen each other's sorrows and not looked away. That evening they sat by the fire. Ethan cooked the rabbit from the trap and they ate together. The wind howled outside, but inside the cabin was warm. Safe. Ethan finally broke the silence. "You don't have to tell me, but who's looking for you?" Claire put her fork down. Her hands were shaking slightly. A man named Brother Malcolm Cross. Ethan waited. Claire took a breath. 2 years ago, I found New Eden Ministry. Or they found me. Brother Malcolm promised purpose, community, salvation. After Grace died, I was lost. I wanted to believe in something. Her voice was hollow. At first, it was beautiful. We prayed. We helped the poor. We lived simply. It felt real. What changed everything? Claire's eyes were distant, remembering. Malcolm started isolating us. No letters, no visitors. He said the world was corrupting, that we needed to be pure. Then he started arranging marriages. Ethan's hands tightened on his cup. He called them holy unions, Claire continued, but they were transactions. Men would come. They would pay him $300, $500, $800, and he would give them one of us. If we refused, we were locked in the cellar, starved, beaten, told we were impure, that we needed to be cleansed. Ethan's voice was deadly quiet. How many women? 14 that I know of, maybe more. Claire looked at him. I tried to leave twice before. Failed. This time Sister Sarah Morgan helped me. She created a distraction so I could run. Where is she now? Still there, Claire's voice broke. I don't know if Malcolm found out she helped me. If he did, she couldn't finish the sentence. We'll get her out, Ethan said. Claire looked at him, surprised. You're not going back alone, and we're not leaving her there. Suddenly there was a sound outside, faint, distant, but unmistakable. Dogs. Ethan was on his feet instantly. He moved to the window and looked out into the darkness. Claire stood, her heart pounding. How many men does Malcolm have? 6, maybe 8. Claire's voice shook. Unless his brother leads them. They're hunters. They'll track me. Ethan was already moving, loading his rifle, checking his ammunition. The Winchester took 15 rounds in the tube magazine. He made sure it was full. Then we make sure they don't find you. You can't fight them all, Claire said. You should give me up. Ethan stopped. He turned to face her, his eyes hard as stone. Listen to me. I spent 5 years running from what I did. I'm not running anymore. And I sure as hell am not handing a woman over to men like that. You don't even know me. Don't need to. I know enough. He turned back to his preparations. Now, you know how to shoot. Claire hesitated. My father taught me, a long time ago. Ethan handed her a pistol, a Colt .45, Peacemaker, heavy, 6 rounds, serious recoil. It'll come back. He showed her how to load it, how to aim, how to brace for the kick. Claire's hands shook at first, but as she went through the motions, muscle memory returned. Her father had taught her to shoot tin cans when she was 12. She'd been good at it then. Ethan set up a tin can on the far side of the cabin. Try it. She fired. The shot was loud in the enclosed space, the recoil pushing her hands up, but the can flew off the shelf. Ethan nodded approval. Good. Claire stared at the gun in her hands. She had never thought she would hold a weapon again. But freedom was worth more than any vow. The torches were closer now. Ethan could see them through the trees, moving like fireflies in the darkness. 4, maybe 5 men. He turned to Claire. Stay behind me. If anyone gets through, you shoot. Understand? She nodded. The voices came next, rough, confident. Wolf, a man's voice cut through the night. We know you got her. Send the sister out. This ends peaceful. Ethan didn't respond. He checked his rifle one more time. 15 rounds ready. The voice came again, colder now. We don't want trouble, mountain man. The sister is confused. She needs care. Send her out. Claire whispered, That's Silas, Malcolm's brother. He's the worst. Ethan opened the shutter an inch and shouted back, his voice carrying across the snow. Sister Claire is not stolen. She's a free woman who walked to my door. Now get off my land. A laugh echoed back. Free brother Malcolm owns her. She's bound by holy vows. Only vows I recognize are ones made freely. Ethan's voice was iron. Now I'm going to count to 10. You're not gone by then I start shooting. You're one man, Wolf. We're 5. You do the math. 1, Ethan said. Claire could hear the men moving, spreading out. 2. They won't leave, she whispered. 3. Ethan handed her the pistol. Back door. Anyone comes through, you shoot. 4, 5. A boot kicked at the back door hard. Claire jumped but held her ground, aiming the pistol with both hands. 6, 7. The kicking stopped. Silence. 8, 9, 10. Ethan fired through the front window. The shot was a warning, hitting a tree near the men. They scattered. Return fire came immediately, bullets thudding into the cabin walls. Claire ducked her heart in her throat. Stay low, Ethan shouted. He fired again. This time a man screamed. Ethan had hit him in the shoulder. Not fatal, but disabling. The man went down in the snow. You shot my man, Silas's voice was furious. Next one won't be in the shoulder. Leave now. There was a long pause. Then the sound of horses, men mounting up, riding away. But Silas's voice carried back one last time. This isn't over, Wolf. Brother Malcolm will come himself, and when he does, you'll wish you'd handed her over. The sound of hoofbeats faded into the night. Silence settled over the cabin like fresh snow. Ethan lowered his rifle. He checked the windows one more time, making sure they were really gone. Then he turned to Claire. She was still holding the pistol, her hands shaking now that the danger had passed. She lowered it slowly and sank against the wall. You did good, Ethan said, crossing to her. He gently took the gun from her hands. I almost shot, she said, her voice breaking. I had my finger on the trigger. But you didn't. You waited. That's discipline. Claire looked up at him. You've done this before. Fought like this. Ethan sat down next to her, not crowding her, just being present. Different circumstances. Same principle. Protect what matters. I'm not your responsibility. No, but you're under my roof. That makes it my business. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Claire did something that surprised them both. She reached out and touched his hand. Ethan looked at her hand on his, then at her face. Why are you doing this? She asked quietly. Really? Ethan was silent for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was honest, raw. 5 years ago, I stood by while a man died. I could have stopped it. I didn't. He looked at her. I can't change that, but I can make sure it doesn't happen again. Not on my watch. You think saving me absolves you? No, nothing absolves me, but it's a start. Claire's eyes filled with tears. She squeezed his hand. Then we're both looking for redemption. Ethan's mouth twitched into something that might have been a smile. Guess so. They sat by the fire as the wind died down outside. The storm was passing, and for the first time in a very long time, neither of them felt quite so alone. Sometimes two lost people find each other at exactly the right time, not to fill the emptiness, but to walk the road home together. And that night in a small cabin high in the Appalachian Mountains, two people who had stopped believing in miracles began to believe again. Not in divine intervention, but in something simpler, something harder, in each other. Morning came cold and clear. The storm had passed during the night, leaving the world wrapped in fresh snow that sparkled like broken glass in the early light. Inside the cabin, Ethan was already awake, stoking the fire, preparing coffee. He moved quietly, trying not to wake Claire, who still slept in the bed he had given her. But she was already stirring. Her eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the dim light. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then memory returned, along with the reality of what had happened the night before. The gunfight, the threats, the promise that Brother Malcolm himself would come. She sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. Through the window, she could see Ethan outside chopping wood. Even in the freezing morning air, he worked without his coat. His breath came out in white clouds. The muscles in his shoulders and arms moved with each swing of the axe, steady and sure. There was something reassuring about watching him work, something solid, dependable. A man who knew what needed doing and did it without complaint. He glanced up and saw her at the window, a brief nod, nothing more. But it was enough. When he came back inside, he brought the cold with him, along with the smell of pine and fresh-cut wood. Morning, he said, handing her a cup of coffee. The tin cup was warm in her hands. Sleep all right. Better than I have in 2 years. They ate breakfast in companionable silence. Pancakes again, simple but good. Claire found herself studying Ethan when he wasn't looking. The way he moved with such economy, no wasted motion, no unnecessary words. He was a man who had learned to live with only what he needed. They'll be back, Ethan said, finally breaking the silence. Maybe not today, but soon. I know. We can't stay here forever. He looked at her directly. We need to get you somewhere safe, somewhere with witnesses, with law. Claire set down her fork. Where is safe? Malcolm has money, influence, people believe him. Then we make them stop believing. Ethan stood and walked to the window. There's a town, Harper's Ridge, 8 miles from here. Sheriff there is Ruth Blackwood. She's fair, tough. If anyone will listen, it's her. And if she doesn't, then we find another way. But sitting here waiting for Malcolm to come with an army isn't a plan. It's suicide. Claire considered this. She had run for so long. The idea of walking into a town, of facing people, of telling her story terrified her, but Ethan was right. Hiding wouldn't save her, or Sarah, or any of the others. All right, she said. We go to Harper's Ridge. They prepared quickly. Ethan packed supplies into a leather satchel. Food, ammunition, a blanket, water. Claire dressed in the borrowed clothes he had given her. His old work shirt rolled at the sleeves. Pants that were too big but held up with a belt. The boots that almost fit. She caught her reflection in the small mirror by the door and barely recognized herself. She didn't look like Sister Claire anymore. She looked like a woman who had survived something terrible and was still standing. Before they left, she picked up her wooden cross from the table. She held it for a moment, feeling its weight. Then she put it in her pocket. Not around her neck. Not yet. She wasn't sure what it meant to her anymore. Wasn't sure if she had the right to wear it. Ethan noticed but said nothing. The trail to Harper's Ridge followed the ridgeline, staying high above the valley floor. Ethan explained that the main road would be too exposed, too easy for Malcolm's men to watch. Up here, they could see anyone coming from miles away. The sun was bright, the sky a hard blue. Their breath came out in white plumes. The snow crunched under their boots with each step. Ethan moved with the confidence of someone who knew every inch of this land. Claire followed, her body still sore but stronger than it had been days ago. How long? She asked. 3 hours, maybe 4. He glanced back at her. You holding up? I walked 4 days through a blizzard to get away from him. I can manage 8 miles to face him. Ethan's mouth twitched. Almost a smile. That's the spirit. They walked in silence for a while. The only sounds were the crunch of snow, the occasional call of a crow, the whisper of wind through bare branches. It was peaceful in a way that surprised Claire. She had forgotten what peace felt like. Tell me about Harper's Ridge, she said. Small mining town, maybe 200 people. Coal mostly, some farming on the edges. Good people for the most part. And Sheriff Blackwood. Ruth, Ethan's voice carried respect. Her husband was sheriff before her, died in a mine collapse about 6 years back. She took the badge and never looked back. She doesn't suffer fools, and she doesn't take bribes. If there's anyone in that town who will stand up to Malcolm, it's her. You sound like you know her well. I did once before I came to the mountain. Claire wanted to ask more, but something in Ethan's tone told her this wasn't the time. They walked on. After about 2 hours, they stopped to rest on a flat outcropping of rock. Ethan handed her some dried meat and hardtack. Not fancy, but it gave them energy. Below, they could see the valley spreading out white and pristine. It's beautiful, Claire said quietly. It is. Ethan looked out over the landscape. That's why I stayed. Up here, the world makes sense. No lies, no pretending, just survival. Is that enough, just survival? He was quiet for a long moment. It was for a while, but maybe there's supposed to be more. Before Claire could respond, Ethan stiffened. His hand went to his rifle. What is it? Riders, 3 of them, coming up the trail behind us. Claire's heart jumped into her throat. She turned to look. 3 horsemen were indeed approaching, moving at a steady pace. For a moment, panic seized her. But then Ethan relaxed slightly. It's all right, I know the lead rider. The 3 men drew closer. The one in front was old, his face like carved mahogany, deeply lined with age and weather. He had long gray hair and wore buckskin clothing that looked handmade. His eyes were dark and sharp, taking in everything. Ethan Wolfe, the old man said, reining in his horse. His voice carried the trace of an accent. Cherokee, Claire realized. Been a long time, Bear. Red sky. Ethan inclined his head with clear respect. Didn't expect to see you out here. The old man's eyes shifted to Claire, studying her with an intensity that made her feel like he could see straight through to her soul. "Been tracking some men through my land," Red Sky said. "Bad men, hunters, looking for something." His gaze didn't leave Claire. "Or someone." "How many?" Ethan's voice was tight. "6 men, led by a man in black, fancy clothes. Calls himself Brother Malcolm." The name hit Claire like a physical blow. Her breath caught. "Where are they now?" Ethan asked. Red Sky pointed down toward the valley. "They rode into Harper's Ridge about an hour ago, asking questions, looking for a woman, a nun who ran away." Claire felt the world tilt. He's already there. Red Sky looked at Ethan. "This woman, she's a friend of yours. She's under my protection." The old man studied them both for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Then you're walking into a fight, old friend. That man has power in the town. Money. People listen to him. And he's not the kind who gives up." "I know." Red Sky reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small leather pouch. He tossed it to Ethan, who caught it one-handed. "Herbs for wounds. You'll need them." Ethan nodded his thanks. "Be careful, Bear," Red Sky said. "Men who hide behind God's name are the most dangerous kind. They think they can't be touched." Then he and his companions turned their horses and rode back the way they had come, disappearing into the trees as silently as they had appeared. Claire looked at Ethan. "What do we do now?" "Now we go talk to Ruth, fast, before Malcolm knows we're in town." 10 miles north of Harper's Ridge at New Eden Ministry, Brother Malcolm Cross sat in his private office. The room was richly appointed, expensive furniture, Persian rugs, a locked safe in the corner filled with money. It was a stark contrast to the bare prison-like rooms where the sisters lived. His brother Silas stood before him, his arm still bandaged from Ethan's bullet. "She's with the sheriff now," Silas said. "We can't just grab her off the street." Malcolm's fingers drummed on the desk. "No, but we can discredit her, make her look unstable, delusional." "How?" "Pastor Graham owes me several favors, large favors. He'll preach tomorrow about the dangers of false witness, about disturbed women who make wild accusations against godly men." Malcolm smiled coldly. "By the time he's done, the whole town will think Claire has lost her mind." "And if that doesn't work," Malcolm opened a drawer and pulled out a leather ledger. Inside were names, dates, amounts paid, a complete record of every transaction he had ever made. "Half the prominent men in this valley are in this book," he said. "The mayor, 3 town councilmen, the owner of the general store, the head of the mining company. If Claire pushes this, I'll threaten to expose them all. They'll turn on her to save themselves." Silas grinned. "Smart. Always." Malcolm closed the ledger. "Now go get Sarah. Bring her to me." Malcolm sat alone after Silas left. He poured himself whiskey from a crystal decanter. Expensive, imported, the kind of luxury he had earned through years of careful work. He looked at the portrait on his wall. Elizabeth, his wife, dead 15 years now. The memory came unbidden. It was 1870. Malcolm Cross was 30 years old, a circuit preacher traveling through West Virginia. He believed then, truly believed, in good end, in prayer, in divine mercy. Elizabeth lay in their bed, her face pale as paper. Consumption, the doctor said. Tuberculosis, there was no cure. Just a slow drowning as her lungs filled with fluid. Malcolm knelt beside the bed, hands clasped so tight his knuckles went white. He prayed, hour after hour, day after day, begging God to save her, promising anything, everything. Elizabeth gasped for air, her eyes wide with terror. "Malcolm, please, make it stop." But he couldn't. God didn't answer. The prayers went nowhere. She died gasping, begging for relief he couldn't give. Something broke in Malcolm that night. If God wouldn't answer prayers, then Malcolm would become the answer people sought. He would give them what they needed: structure, purpose, salvation on his terms. New Eden Ministry was born from that broken faith. Another memory, 1877, 8 years after Elizabeth's death. New Eden had grown, 20 sisters, a chapel, a soup kitchen. It was real work, good work. Malcolm almost believed again. Then the merchant came. Thomas Wright, wealthy, middle-aged, needed a wife. "I'll make a generous donation," Wright said. $500 for the ministry's work. Malcolm hesitated. This crossed a line. But the ministry needed money. The orphanage needed funding. The soup kitchen couldn't run on prayers alone. Holy matrimony is holy matrimony, Malcolm told himself. The money does God's work. Sister Rebecca was 23, quiet, obedient. She cried during the ceremony, but Malcolm told himself it was nerves. She would be happy. Wright was a good man, respectable. Wright paid $300. Malcolm kept the money. The rationalization had begun. The final memory, 1882, 3 years ago. Emma Blake tried to escape. Silas caught her at the river 2 miles from the ministry. She was brought to Malcolm's office, wrist rope, burned eyes defiant. "You can't keep us prisoner," Emma said. "This is slavery." Malcolm's voice was cold. "This is salvation. You're ungrateful." He ordered Silas to purify her in the river. A baptism, a cleansing, a reminder of vows. Silas went too far. Or maybe he didn't. Maybe it was always going to end this way. Emma drowned. Whether accident or murder, Malcolm never asked. He paid the coroner, paid the sheriff. Accidental drowning. That was the point of no return, the moment his conscience died completely. Some are too broken to be saved, Malcolm told himself. That's God's will. He didn't believe it, but he said it anyway. Malcolm finished his whiskey and stood. Those memories were the past. Claire Ashford was the present, and he would handle her the same way he handled everything, with money, with influence, with ruthless efficiency. They descended into the valley from the north side. Harper's Ridge was larger than Claire had expected. A main street lined with wooden buildings, a church with a white steeple, general store, saloon, hotel, houses scattered on the outskirts. Smoke rose from dozens of chimneys. People moved along the wooden sidewalks going about their Saturday business. Ethan led her along the back streets, keeping them out of sight as much as possible. A few people glanced at them with curiosity, but most paid them no mind. Just another couple of travelers passing through. They were almost to the sheriff's office when a voice called out, "Well, well, if it isn't the legendary bear himself." Ethan stopped. Claire felt him tense like a coiled spring. A man stepped out from the shadow of a building, tall and lean, dressed in expensive black clothing that stood out sharply against the rough frontier town. His face was handsome in a cold, chiseled way, pale eyes, a smile that didn't reach those eyes. Around his neck hung a large gold cross. Brother Malcolm Cross. "Sister Claire," Malcolm's voice dripped with false warmth. "My dear child, thank the Lord you're safe. We've been so worried about you." He started walking toward them, his arms open as if to embrace her. Ethan stepped between them, his hand moving to the rifle on his back. Malcolm stopped, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. His smile never wavered. "And you must be the good Samaritan who found her. Brother Malcolm Cross. I run New Eden Ministry. Sister Claire is one of our flock. She wandered away during the storm. Poor thing, we've been searching everywhere." "She's not going back," Ethan said flatly. Malcolm's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. Then it returned even brighter. He turned to the crowd. People had stopped on the street, sensing drama. "I understand your concern, friend, truly. But the poor dear has been through such trauma. She's confused, feverish. She needs proper medical care. We have doctors at the ministry." Claire stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "I didn't wander away. I escaped." A murmur rippled through the gathering crowd. Malcolm turned to them, his expression one of profound sadness. "You see, friends, the poor girl is clearly unwell, delirious. She needs rest and prayer, not to be encouraged in these fantasies." Behind Malcolm, Claire could see the sisters. 14 women in gray habits, heads bowed, walking in a line. They looked like ghosts, like shadows of human beings. At the end of the line was Sarah Morgan. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. When she saw Claire, her expression crumbled. Hope and fear warred on her face. "Sarah Morgan helped me escape from you," Claire said, her voice growing stronger. "She risked everything to help me get away from what you're doing to those women." Malcolm spread his hands to the crowd. "This is what fever does, friends. It twists the mind. creates false memories. Sister Claire is a troubled soul. I pray for her recovery." He reached for Claire's arm. Ethan's hand shot out, grabbing Malcolm's wrist in an iron grip. "Touch her and lose the hand." The street went completely silent. The two men stood locked eyes meeting. For a moment, violence hung in the air like electricity before a lightning strike. "That's enough!" A woman's voice cut through the tension like a knife. She strode toward them from the direction of the sheriff's office. Tall, maybe 50 years old, with steel gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore a badge on her chest and a Colt revolver on her hip. Her face was weathered and hard, but her eyes were intelligent and missed nothing. "Sheriff Ruth Blackwood." "Malcolm Wolf, step back, both of you now." Both men released their grips and stepped apart. Ruth walked between them, her gaze sweeping over Claire. "You all right, miss?" Claire nodded, finding her voice. "Sheriff, I need to report a crime." Malcolm's voice was smooth as oil. "Sheriff Blackwood, I apologize for this disturbance. This is Sister Claire. She's been missing from our ministry for 5 days. As you can see, she's clearly unwell. I only want to help her." Ruth held up a hand, silencing him without even looking at him. "I'll decide who's unwell, Malcolm." Her eyes stayed on Claire. "Come with me inside. We'll talk." "I have a right to be present when—" "You've got no rights here except the ones I give you." Ruth's voice was iron. "This is my jurisdiction. Now clear the street before I arrest you for obstruction." She escorted Claire and Ethan into her office, leaving Malcolm standing on the street. For just a moment, his mask slipped. Pure rage flashed across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by his benevolent smile. He waved to the townspeople and walked calmly toward the church. But Claire had seen it, the real Malcolm, and she knew he wouldn't let this go. Ruth's office was small and utilitarian. A scarred wooden desk, 2 chairs, a gun rack on the wall, 2 cells in the back currently empty. Wanted posters covered one wall. Ruth gestured for them to sit. Then she settled into her chair and looked at Claire. "Start from the beginning. Don't leave anything out." Claire took a deep breath. 2 years ago, my sister Grace died of a drug overdose in Baltimore. I was working as a social worker at the time. I couldn't save her. After she died, I felt lost, empty. I wanted to help people, to find meaning. That's when I heard about New Eden Ministry. Ruth listened, her face impassive, taking notes. "Brother Malcolm came to Baltimore on a recruiting trip. He was so charismatic, so convincing. He talked about building a community of faith and service, about helping the poor, about living simply and finding purpose." Claire's voice grew harder. "I believed him. I joined willingly. At first, everything was just as he promised. We prayed together. We ran a soup kitchen. We helped orphans. It felt real." "What changed, Boaz?" "Malcolm started slowly isolating us. First, he said we should limit contact with the outside world to focus on our spiritual development. Then he stopped allowing visitors. Then he took our letters. He said it was to protect us from worldly corruption. We believed him." Ruth wrote steadily. "Then the marriages started. Malcolm said God had revealed to him that some of us were meant for holy matrimony. Men started coming to the ministry. Rich men, powerful men. They would meet with Malcolm in his office. Money would change hands. And then one of the sisters would be told she was being married." Ruth's pen stopped. She looked up, her eyes hard. "If we refused, we were locked in the cellar. Starved, beaten, told we were sinful and pure, that we needed to be purified through obedience. How many women? 14 that I know of, maybe more. Some disappeared. One, Emma Blake, was found dead in the river 3 years ago. It was ruled an accidental drowning." "I remember Emma." "Oh, Emma," Ruth said quietly. "It wasn't an accident. Emma tried to escape. They hunted her down. I saw her body before they took it away. She had bruises around her throat. Marks on her wrists like she'd been tied up. Those weren't from falling in a river." The room was silent for a moment. Ethan spoke up. "Sister Sarah Morgan is still at the ministry. She helped Claire escape. If Malcolm knows she helped, her life is in danger." Ruth sat back in her chair. She looked tired, suddenly older. "Here's the problem. Malcolm has influence, real influence. He donates thousands to the church, to the orphanage, to widows. He has friends in Charleston, politicians, judges. I go after him. Without ironclad proof, I'll be shut down before I even start. They'll say I'm persecuting a holy man based on the ravings of one disturbed woman. Then what am I supposed to do? Claire's voice cracked. You stay here in town where I can protect you. I'll investigate quietly. Talk to people, see if anyone else will come forward. But I need evidence, real evidence. His word against yours won't hold up in court. There's someone you should meet, Ruth said, standing. She led them down the street to a small clinic. It smelled of carbolic acid and dried herbs. An older man with a gray beard and tired eyes sat at a desk writing in a ledger. He looked up when they entered. Doc, this is Claire. She needs examining. Doc Harrison's eyes met Claire's and something flickered there. Recognition. Guilt. She's from New Eden, Ruth said quietly. The doctor's face went pale. He set down his pen carefully. I see. He gestured Claire into an examination room. Ethan started to follow, but the doctor shook his head. Give us privacy, please. Inside the small room, Doc Harrison examined her wrists, her ankles, the bruises on her arms. His touch was gentle, professional, but his hands shook slightly. How did you get these? He asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. They chained us when we tried to resist, when we refused to comply. The doctor was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice heavy with shame. I've treated 6 women from New Eden in the past 3 years. Every single one had injuries. Broken ribs, burns, strangulation marks. One had a fractured skull. She claimed she fell downstairs. Another had strangulation marks around her neck. Did you report it? Doc Harrison shook his head. I asked them what happened. They all gave the same answers. They fell. They were clumsy. Everything was fine at the ministry. His voice broke slightly. I knew they were lying. I knew someone was hurting them. But I was a coward. Malcolm has power, money. I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere, that I had no proof. He met her eyes. And now a girl braver than I'll ever be risked her life to tell the truth. The least I can do is back her up. I'll testify. I'll write down everything I've seen, every injury, every lie. It might not be enough, but it's something. After the examination, Ruth took them to a large boarding house on the edge of town. The sign above the door read, Harper's Respectable Lodging for Ladies. Inside, a formidable woman in her 50s stood behind the counter. She had steel gray hair, strong arms, and eyes that had seen too much suffering. Ada, Ruth said, this is Claire. She needs a room, and she needs discretion. Ada Harper looked Claire up and down. Her gaze was sharp, but not unkind. New Eden, Claire nodded, surprised. How did you know? I know that look. I've seen it in the mirror. Ada's voice was hard as stone. My daughter went to a place like New Eden 8 years ago. Different name, different man, but the same evil underneath. She was told she'd find purpose and community. She found a cage instead. The room went quiet. She didn't come back, Ada said. By the time I found where she was already dead. They said she hung herself, but I never believed it. Tears stood in Ada's eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She straightened her shoulders. You'll stay here. Top floor back room, no charge. And if that bastard Malcolm comes looking for you, he'll have to go through me first. And I promise you that's a fight he doesn't want. Thank you, Claire whispered. Don't thank me yet. Just help me bring him down. That evening, Claire sat in her small room at Harper's. It was clean and warm with a real bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the town. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. There was a knock at the door. Ethan entered, carrying her a small bundle of possessions. Brought your things, he said. He crossed to the window and checked the latch, testing it. Old habit, making sure it's secure. You don't have to stay. I know, but you will anyway. I will. She stood and walked to him. They were close now, closer than they had been since that moment in the cabin. She could see the weariness in his eyes, the weight he carried. Why? She asked quietly. You've already done more than anyone had a right to ask. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Because when I look at you, I see someone worth fighting for. And it's been a very long time since I felt that way about anything. Claire felt tears sting her eyes. When I look at you, I see someone who's already fought the hardest battle there is, the one against yourself, and you won. She reached out slowly, touching his face. His hand was rough, calloused, but his touch was impossibly gentle when he covered her hand with his. "We're going to get Sarah out," he said. "And the others? I promise you that." Together, together. They stood their faces inches apart. Claire wanted to close the distance to kiss him, but something held her back. "Not yet," she whispered. "When this is over, when I'm truly free, when I'm not running anymore." Then, Ethan nodded understanding without her having to explain. Then he stepped back, putting distance between them. "I'll be downstairs. You need anything, you call." After he left, Claire sat on the bed and pulled the wooden cross from her pocket. She stared at it in the lamplight, running her thumb over the worn wood. She wasn't sure what she believed anymore, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She believed in Ethan Wolfe, and maybe that was a start. There was another knock. A young boy stood at her door holding an envelope. "Letter for you, miss. Man paid me to deliver it." Claire took it with shaking hands. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Sarah's. Inside the letter was brief and tear-stained. "Claire, please come back. I was wrong to help you. Brother Malcolm forgives us both. He says you're sick, confused, but he can heal you. Please, sister, I'm so scared. If you don't come back, he says, I'll have to take your place. Please don't leave me here alone, Sarah." Claire's vision blurred with tears. A cry escaped her throat. Ethan and Ruth, who had been downstairs, came running. "What is it?" She showed them the letter. Ethan read it, his jaw tightening with each word. "It's a trap. I know, but she's terrified. And it's because of McBamey. It's because of Malcolm. If I don't go back, he'll hurt her. If you go back, he wins. He'll have you both locked up in that compound, and we'll never get either of you out." Claire paced the small room, her mind racing. Then she stopped. She looked at the letter, then at Ethan, then back at the letter. Her mind began to work. The same sharp intelligence that had helped her survive 2 years at New Eden. "He wants me to come back. That's his entire plan." "Right," Ethan nodded slowly. "So what if I do, but not quietly, not alone? What if I confront him publicly tomorrow at church in front of the whole town?" "That's exactly what he expects," Ethan said. "He'll make you look unstable, emotional, easy to dismiss." "Or par," Claire continued, her voice growing stronger. "I make him look evil. He's expecting me to be desperate, hysterical. But what if I'm calm? What if I have witnesses, evidence? What if I don't just accuse him but prove it?" "What proof?" Ruth asked. "Doc Harrison's testimony, Ada and the other women who have lost daughters. Even Pastor Graham if he finds his courage." Ethan studied her, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You want to put him on trial, not in a courthouse, in the court of public opinion." "Exactly. If we can't get him through the law yet, we destroy his reputation. Make it impossible for him to operate. Show everyone who he really is." Ethan's mouth curved into something between a smile and a grimace. "It's brilliant and dangerous as hell. I'm done being safe." Ruth, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped into the room. "I can't officially sanction this, but I'll be there in the back watching. And if he steps out of line, if he threatens you or tries to take you by force, I'll have legal grounds to arrest him." Ada appeared behind her. "I'll gather the women, every mother who's lost a daughter, every wife who's lost a sister. We'll fill that church. Malcolm may have money and power, but we have numbers, and we have truth." Claire looked at each of them in turn. These people, these near strangers, were willing to risk everything to stand with her, because they believed her, because they had seen their own loved ones destroyed by men like Malcolm. "Tomorrow morning," Claire said, her voice steady and clear, "I walk into that church, I sit in the front row, I let him see me, and when the moment is right, I stand up and I tell the truth. All of it, in front of everyone." "And if he tries to take you by force," Ethan asked, "then you stop him." Ethan checked his rifle. His movements were precise and practiced. "Count on it." Sunday morning broke cold and clear over Harper's Ridge. The sky was the pale blue of winter, sharp and clean. Church bells began to ring at 9 o'clock, their sound carrying across the valley, calling the faithful to worship. But this was no ordinary Sunday. In her room at Harper's boarding house, Claire stood before the small mirror, hardly recognizing herself. Ada had brought her a simple dress, dark blue calico, modest and plain. It fit reasonably well. Ada had also found a proper pair of boots, worn but sturdy. Claire's hair, which had been wild and tangled from her days in the wilderness, was now clean and pulled back in a simple braid. She looked like a respectable woman. Not a nun, not a victim, just a woman preparing to tell the truth. Ada knocked softly and entered. "You ready?" Claire took a deep breath. "As I'll ever be." "Remember what we talked about. Stay calm. Don't let him provoke you. Just tell your story plain and simple. The truth is powerful enough on its own. What if they don't believe me?" "Then they don't. But at least you'll have spoken. At least Sarah will know you tried." Ada's weathered hand squeezed Claire's shoulder. "And there are more people on your side than you think." Downstairs, Ethan waited. He had cleaned up as well. A fresh shirt, his beard trimmed, but the rifle was still slung across his back and the pistol was still at his hip. He looked up as Claire descended the stairs. For a moment, he just stared. "You look different," he said finally. "Different good or different Ian, different strong." Outside, the streets were already filling with people heading to church, families in their Sunday best, miners who had scrubbed the coal dust from their hands and faces, children running ahead of their parents. It looked like any ordinary Sunday in any ordinary town. But nothing about today was ordinary. Ruth was waiting outside the church, standing to one side watching the crowd. She caught Claire's eye and gave a small nod. "I'll be in the back. You'll be fine." Doc Harrison arrived, looking nervous but determined. He carried a leather folder under his arm, his medical records, his testimony. Then came the widows. Ada had gathered 12 women, all of them mothers or sisters who had lost someone. They arrived together, a silent wall of grief and determination. They didn't speak to Claire, but their presence said everything. Finally, Pastor Samuel Graham appeared at the church door. His face was gray, troubled. He looked at Claire, then at the gathering crowd, then at the sky, as if asking God for guidance. Claire couldn't tell which way he would go. At precisely 9:30, a black carriage rolled down the main street. Expensive, polished, drawn by 4 matched horses. The crowd parted to let it through. Brother Malcolm Cross stepped out resplendent in his black suit and white clerical collar. The gold cross around his neck caught the morning sun. He looked every inch the holy man. Behind him came Silas and 3 other men, all armed. Then came the sisters, 14 women in gray habits, head bowed, walking in a line. They looked like ghosts, like shadows of human beings. At the end of the line was Aura. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. When she saw Claire, her expression crumbled. Hope and fear warred on her face. Claire's heart broke. Malcolm saw Claire standing near the church steps. His smile widened. "Sister Claire, how wonderful to see you looking so well. I trust you've had time to recover from your ordeal." Claire didn't respond. She simply looked at him, her face calm. Malcolm's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. Then it returned even brighter. He turned to the crowd. "Friends, neighbors, it warms my heart to see so many gathered for worship this beautiful morning. Let us go inside and give thanks to the Lord." The congregation began filing into the church. Malcolm and his sisters went first, taking up the pews on the right side. The townspeople followed, filling in around them. The widows sat together in the middle. Doc Harrison took a seat near the aisle. Claire walked down the center aisle. Every eye was on her. She could feel their stares, hear the whispers. But she kept her head high and her steps steady. She walked all the way to the front and sat in the first pew on the left side, directly across from Malcolm. Ethan sat beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. Ruth stood in the back corner, arms crossed, watching everything. The church fell silent. Pastor Graham walked slowly to the pulpit. He gripped the edges with both hands, his knuckles white. For a long moment, he just stood there looking out at his congregation. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cold. Then he spoke. "Friends, neighbors, brothers, and sisters in Christ." His voice was steady but strained. Today's sermon was supposed to be about faith and obedience, about trusting those who guide us spiritually, about not questioning the will of God. He paused. The silence stretched. "But I can't give that sermon." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Malcolm's smile froze on his face. "I can't give that sermon because this morning I was reminded that faith without truth is not faith at all. It's just compliance. And compliance to evil is sin." Malcolm stood, his voice gentle but firm. Pastor Graham, perhaps we should discuss this in private before you say something you'll regret. Sit down, Malcolm. Graham's voice was louder now, stronger. I've been a coward for too long. I've seen things that troubled me and said nothing. I've taken money from men whose actions contradicted their words. I've let fear silence my conscience. But no more. He looked directly at Claire. Today, a woman sits in my church who has more courage than I've ever had. She walked through a blizzard to escape something terrible. She risked her life to tell the truth, and she deserves to be heard. He stepped aside from the pulpit and gestured to Claire. Sister Claire Ashford, would you speak? The church was utterly silent. Every eye turned to Claire. She stood slowly, her legs steady despite the fear coursing through her. She walked to the front and turned to face the congregation. She didn't look at Malcolm. She looked at the ordinary people of Harper's Ridge, the ones who worked and struggled and tried to do right. My name is Claire Ashford, she began, her voice clear. 2 years ago, I joined New Eden Ministry. I was grieving the death of my sister Grace. I was lost. I was looking for purpose. Brother Malcolm promised me community, faith, and service to God. She paused, letting the words settle. What I found was a prison. Murmurs rose. Malcolm started to stand, but Silas pulled him back down, whispering urgently in his ear. For 2 years, I and 13 other women have been isolated, controlled, and sold. Claire continued. Brother Malcolm calls it holy matrimony, but these are not marriages. They are transactions. Men pay him money. He gives them women. If we refuse, we are beaten, starved, locked in cells, told we are sinful and must be purified through obedience. Her voice grew stronger. You all knew Emma Blake. She was found drowned in the river 3 years ago. You were told it was an accident. It wasn't. Emma tried to escape New Eden. She was hunted down. I saw her body before they took it away. She had bruises around her throat, marks on her wrists from being bound. Those were not the injuries of someone who fell. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Malcolm stood, his voice smooth but edged with steel. My dear Claire, you're clearly still suffering from your ordeal. The fever, the exposure, they have affected your mind. These are delusions brought on by trauma. Claire turned to look at him for the first time. I'm not finished. Malcolm's mask cracked slightly. You're disturbed. You need help, not encouragement in these fantasies. Ruth's voice rang out from the back. Let her speak, Malcolm. Malcolm sat back down, his hands gripping the pew in front of him, knuckles white. Claire turned back to the congregation. I'm not the only one who knows the truth. She pointed to where Sarah sat among the gray-clad women. Sister Sarah Morgan helped me escape. She risked everything to give me a chance at freedom. And now she's terrified because she knows what happens to women who defy him. All eyes turned to Sarah. The young woman was trembling, tears streaming down her face. Malcolm's voice was commanding. Sarah, tell them. Tell them you're happy, that you're here of your own free will. Sarah opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She was shaking so hard she could barely sit upright. Malcolm's voice hardened. Sarah. Ada Harper stood up. Leave that girl alone. One by one, the other widows stood with her. 8, 10, 12 women, all rising to their feet in solidarity. We've all lost someone to men like you, Malcolm, Ada said, her voice breaking with emotion. Daughters, sisters, friends. We've stayed silent out of shame, out of fear. But we're done being silent. Doc Harrison stood next, pulling papers from his folder. I've treated 6 women from New Eden in the past 3 years. Every single one had injuries consistent with abuse. Broken bones, burns, strangulation marks. I documented everything. His voice filled with shame. And I said nothing because I was afraid, but I'm speaking now. He handed the papers to Ruth, who took them without taking her eyes off Malcolm. Malcolm stood again, his composure slipping. This is absurd. I have served this community for years. I have given you schools, hospitals, charity, and this is how you repay me. By listening to the ravings of one disturbed woman. She's not raving. A voice from the sister's pew. Everyone turned. Another sister, an older woman with gray streaks in her hair, had stood up. She's telling the truth, the woman said, her voice shaking but clear. Everything she said is true. He locked me in a cell for 3 weeks when I refused to marry a man who paid $500 for me. Another sister stood. He burned my hands when I tried to write a letter to my family. Another. He told me my parents were dead when they weren't, so I'd have no one to turn to. Another. He sold me to a man who beat me. When I came back with broken ribs, he said I deserved it for being disobedient. One by one, all 12 of the other sisters stood, each one speaking a piece of their truth, a catalog of horrors, beatings, starvation, rape, torture, all done in the name of God, of purification, of obedience. The dam had broken. The silence had shattered. Malcolm's face went from pale to red to purple. His carefully constructed facade crumbled completely. "You ungrateful whores," he shouted, his voice echoing off the church walls. "I saved you from the streets. I gave you purpose. I gave you food and shelter and meaning, and this is how you repay me." He pulled a pistol from inside his coat. The crowd gasped. Some screamed, "If I can't have you, no one will." He aimed at Claire. Time slowed. Ethan moved like lightning, throwing himself in front of Claire, knocking her to the floor. The gun went off with a deafening crack. The bullet hit the wall where Claire's head had been a second before. Chaos erupted. Silas drew his gun. Ruth fired from the back, hitting Silas in the arm. He went down screaming. The other two men with Malcolm pulled weapons, but townspeople were already moving, tackling them, disarming them. Miners, farmers, shopkeepers. They'd had enough. Malcolm fired again wildly, hitting nothing. He backed toward the door, still pointing his gun at the crowd. "I built this. I created this. You can't take it from me." He turned and ran out the church door. Ethan was after him in an instant. Claire grabbed a fallen pistol and followed. Ruth shouted after them, "Ethan, wait!" But they were already gone. Outside, Malcolm ran toward his carriage, but the horses had spooked at the gunfire and bolted, leaving the carriage useless. He sprinted toward the edge of town, toward the tree line. Ethan was faster, younger, stronger. He gained ground with every stride. Claire ran behind them both, her heart pounding. Malcolm reached the trees and plunged into the forest. Ethan followed without hesitation. The forest was thick here, the undergrowth tangled. Malcolm crashed through it like a panicked animal. He emerged into a clearing and stopped whirling around. He still had the pistol. "Stay back!" he screamed at Ethan. "Stay back or I'll kill you!" Ethan stopped at the edge of the clearing, his own gun trained on Malcolm. "It's over, Malcolm. Drop the weapon." "Over," Malcolm laughed, a wild, unhinged sound. "It's never over. I have money. I have connections. I'll be out of jail in a week, and when I am, I'll come for all of you." "No, you won't." Claire stepped into the clearing. She had the pistol in both hands aimed at Malcolm. Malcolm's eyes widened. "Claire, my dear girl, you wouldn't shoot me. You're a woman of God." Claire's voice was quiet. "I was, but you taught me that sometimes God needs help from us." Malcolm's gun hand wavered. "Put that down. You're not a killer." "No, but I'm not your victim anymore either." The sound of horses came from behind them. Ruth and a dozen townspeople burst into the clearing, all armed. Malcolm looked around wildly, surrounded, trapped, his empire crumbling around him. For a moment, Claire thought he might surrender. Then she saw his face change, saw the decision in his eyes. He raised his pistol one last time. Ethan and Ruth both fired. Malcolm went down hard, clutching his shoulder and leg. Not fatal shots, deliberate. They wanted him alive to face justice. Ruth walked forward and kicked the gun away from Malcolm's hand. "Brother Malcolm Cross, you're under arrest for attempted murder, kidnapping, human trafficking fraud, and about a dozen other crimes I'll think of on the way to the jail." Malcolm looked up at her, blood seeping through his clothes. "You can't prove any of it." Claire's mind flashed back to the chaos in the church. While everyone was focused on the gunfight, she had seen Malcolm's office keys fall from his coat pocket. An idea formed. "Ruth," Claire said, "I need to go to the ministry now." "What? Why wrong?" "Because Malcolm keeps records. A ledger. I've seen it. Names, dates, payments. Everything." Ruth looked at her. "You know where it is," Claire nodded. "His private office. There's a safe." 30 minutes later, Claire stood in Malcolm's richly appointed office at New Eden Ministry with Ruth and Ethan beside her. The contrast between this room and the bare cells where the sisters lived was obscene. Persian rugs, expensive furniture, crystal decanters of whiskey. Claire walked to the portrait on the wall. A woman. Beautiful. Sad. Elizabeth, Claire said. His wife. She died 15 years ago. She moved the portrait aside. Behind it was a small safe built into the wall. How do you know the combination? Ruth asked. Claire looked at the portrait, at the inscription on the frame. Elizabeth Margaret Cross, born April 12, 1840, died September 3, 1870. She turned the dial. 4, 12, 40. The safe clicked open. Inside was the leather ledger. Claire pulled it out, hands shaking. She opened it. Page after page of transactions. Names she recognized. The mayor, 3 town councilmen, the owner of the general store, the head of the mining company, dates, amounts, which sister was sold to whom. This is it, Ruth said, her voice tight. This is everything we need. Ruth's deputies hauled Malcolm to his feet and half dragged, half carried him back to town. The crowd parted to let them through, silent and stunned. In the church, the sisters huddled together, some crying, some in shock. Ada and the other women were already organizing, bringing blankets, food comfort. Pastor Graham sat at the altar, his face in his hands, weeping. Claire approached him. He looked up. I'm so sorry, I knew. Deep down, I knew something was wrong, and I did nothing. Claire's voice was gentle. You spoke today. When it mattered most, you spoke. That's what counts. Sarah ran to Claire and threw her arms around her, sobbing. Thank you. Thank you. I thought I'd never be free. Claire held her tight. You're free now. We all are. The days that followed were a blur of activity. Ruth launched a full investigation. The ledger was entered into evidence. Doc Harrison's medical records were added. One by one, the sisters gave their testimony, each one adding another nail to Malcolm's coffin. Several prominent men in the valley were implicated. The mayor resigned. 3 town councilmen were arrested as accomplices. The general store owner fled town in the middle of the night. New Eden Ministry was raided. In the cellar, they found the chains, the cells, the evidence of everything Claire had described and worse. Photographs were taken. Evidence was cataloged. Malcolm's trial was set for 3 months later. But everyone knew he would never see freedom again. Too much evidence. Too many witnesses. Even his money and connections couldn't save him now. 2 weeks after that Sunday, Claire stood on the porch of Harper's boarding house looking out over the town. It was evening, the sun setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The sisters had all been relocated. Some went home to families they hadn't seen in years. Others stayed in Harper's Ridge, finding work, starting new lives. Sarah had decided to stay working with Ada at the boarding house, helping other women who needed shelter. Ethan approached from the street below. He had been staying at the boarding house too, in a room on the first floor, giving Claire space but staying close. You leaving? She asked. Thought I might head back to the cabin. Winter's coming on. Need to prepare. Claire nodded, her heart sinking. Of course. But I was thinking, Ethan continued, climbing the steps to stand beside her. That cabin's pretty isolated. Might be good to have it closer to town, in case people need help. A place for folks to go when they're running from something. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe I'm done hiding on that mountain. Maybe it's time to be part of something bigger. Claire looked at him, hope rising in her chest. What would that look like? Ethan shrugged. Not sure yet, but I figure you've got experience helping people. I've got a place and skills. Ruth's got the law. Ada's got the heart. Between all of us, we could make something real. Something that lasts. A sanctuary, Claire said softly. A real one this time. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the sunset. What about us? Claire asked quietly. Ethan turned to look at her. That's up to you. I told you I'd wait until you were ready. That hasn't changed. Claire took a deep breath. For 2 years I was told I was nothing, that my body was the only thing I had of value, that I belonged to whoever paid for me. She looked at him. You're the first person who saw me as more than that, who saw me as a person worth saving. You saved yourself, Ethan said. I just gave you a place to rest while you did it. No, you showed me what a good man looks like, what respect looks like, what it means to be valued for who you are, not what you can give. She turned to face him fully. I'm ready now, not because I need you to save me, but because I choose you, because I want to build something with you. Not as someone you rescued, but as your equal, your partner." Ethan reached out and took her hand, his rough, scarred hand enveloping hers. "Equal partners," he said, "in everything, in everything." He leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. When she instead rose on her toes to meet him, their lips touched. It was not a desperate kiss, not hungry or demanding. It was gentle, tender, a promise of things to come, a beginning, not an ending. When they pulled apart, Claire was crying, but for the first time in years, they were tears of joy. 6 months later, spring had come to the mountains of West Virginia. The snow had melted, replaced by wildflowers that carpeted the hillsides in riots of color. The trees were budding, birds were singing, and the world felt new. The cabin that had once belonged to Ethan alone had been expanded. 2 new rooms, a larger kitchen, a barn for horses. It sat on the edge of Harper's Ridge, now close enough to town to be accessible, but far enough away to offer privacy. A new sign hung over the door. Mountain Haven. It was a sanctuary, a real one. A place where women escaping abuse could find shelter, where they could heal, where they could learn skills and find their strength again. Claire ran the day-to-day operations. Sarah helped her along with 3 of the other former sisters from New Eden. Ada came up from town twice a week to cook and counsel. Doc Harrison provided medical care free of charge. Ruth stopped by regularly to check on everyone and provide legal assistance. And Ethan built. He expanded the buildings, taught the women carpentry and survival skills, and stood guard over all of them with fierce protectiveness. On a warm spring evening, a wagon rolled up the path to Mountain Haven. A woman climbed down, young, maybe 20, with a black eye and a split lip. She carried a small child on her hip. Claire walked out to meet her. "Is this?" the woman began, her voice shaking. "Is this the place where women can be safe?" Claire smiled gently. "Yes, you're safe here. What's your name?" "Emily." "Welcome, Emily. Come inside. We'll get you and your baby settled." As Emily walked toward the house, another woman appeared at the door. Then another, and another. 5 women now called Mountain Haven home. All of them healing, all of them learning to be strong again. That evening, after Emily and her child were fed and asleep, Claire stood on the porch watching the sunset. Ethan came out to join her, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. "That's the 47th woman we've helped," he said, handing her a cup. 47th, Claire repeated. "It's a start. It's more than a start. It's a legacy." Claire leaned against him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "Did you ever think when I knocked on your door in that blizzard that it would lead to this?" "No, I thought I'd give you shelter for a night and you'd move on." Ethan paused. "Best thing that ever happened to me was answering that door. Best thing that ever happened to me was having the courage to knock." They stood together as the sun sank below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. 1 year after that Sunday in Harper's Ridge, on a crisp autumn morning, Claire stood alone in the small cemetery on the edge of town. She carried a bouquet of wildflowers. She stopped at a simple headstone. The inscription read, "Emma Blake, beloved daughter, gone, but not forgotten." Claire knelt and placed the flowers on the grave. "I kept my promise, Emma," she said softly. "I brought him down. He'll never hurt anyone again." The breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and earth. "I think about you every day, about how brave you were to try to escape, about how you paid the price for his evil. But your death wasn't in vain. Because of you, because of what happened to you, 47 women are free now, and that number grows every month." She stood brushing dirt from her skirt. "Rest easy, sister. You're remembered, you're honored, and you're avenged." As she walked back toward town, she saw Ethan waiting for her at the cemetery gate. He didn't ask where she had been. He just fell into step beside her, his presence solid and comforting. They walked together down the main street of Harper's Ridge. People greeted them warmly. The town had changed. The corruption had been rooted out. New leadership had been elected. And Mountain Haven had become a source of pride, a symbol of the community's commitment to protecting the vulnerable. 5 years after that Sunday, Mountain Haven had helped over 150 women. 3 had gone on to open their own shelters in other towns. 1 had become a lawyer specializing in cases of abuse and trafficking. Another had become a doctor. The legacy was spreading, growing, touching lives in ways Claire could never have imagined. The fire crackled in the stone hearth at Mountain Haven. The year was 1920, and Ethan Wolfe was finishing his story. Daniel sat silent, moved. Through the window, Mountain Haven was visible as a large complex now. Over 300 women helped in 35 years. That's the story, Ethan said, of a woman who thought she was nothing and a blizzard that brought her to my door. Daniel's voice was quiet. What happened to her, to Claire? Ethan smiled, touching the wooden cross around his own neck. She's still here, still running Mountain Haven, still saving women every day. Want to meet her? He led Daniel outside. Across the courtyard, a woman in her 60s, still strong, still graceful, talked with a young mother holding a baby. The same kindness in her eyes, the same strength. Claire, Ethan called. She turned, smiled, and walked over. Is this Daniel about to head off to war, are you? Daniel nodded, shy. Your grandfather saved my life, Claire said. Not by fighting for me, though he did that, but by showing me I was worth saving. She touched Daniel's shoulder. Whatever you face over there, remember this. Real courage isn't about fighting. It's about protecting. It's about standing up for those who can't stand for themselves. It's about refusing to be silent when you see wrong. The next morning, Daniel left for war. Ethan and Claire stood together watching him go. After all these years still together, still building, still saving, still hoping. As Daniel's train pulled away, the camera would pan up to the Mountain Haven sign. Below it, carved into wood, founded 1886 by Claire Ashford and Ethan Wolfe, in memory of Emma Blake and all those who came before. A sanctuary for those who need it most. Ethan's voice one last time. Sometimes two lost people find each other at exactly the right time, not to fill the emptiness, but to walk the road home together and build something that lasts long after they're gone. Claire Ashford had walked into a storm seeking death and found life instead. And she had taken that life and given it meaning. Purpose, legacy, not through suffering, but through rising from it. Not through being saved, but through saving others. That evening, back at Mountain Haven, there was another knock on the door. Claire opened it to find three women standing there, a mother and two daughters, all with the same haunted look Claire had once worn. We heard there's a place, the mother said, a place where we can be safe. Claire smiled and stepped back, opening the door wide. There is. Welcome home. As the women entered, the sheriff appeared to help them get settled. The other residents gathered around, offering blankets, food, comfort. The house filled with quiet voices, with the sound of women helping women, of broken people coming together to heal. Ethan stood in the doorway watching. Claire joined him, taking his hand. We're making a difference, she said. You're making a difference. I'm just building the walls. You're building more than walls. You're building a future. We're building it together. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, soft, gentle, covering the world in white. But inside Mountain Haven, there was warmth. There was safety, there was love, and there was redemption. Not the kind that came from prayers or penance, but the kind that came from action, from standing up, from speaking truth, from helping others climb out of the darkness you yourself had escaped. That night, as Claire prepared for bed, she pulled the wooden cross from her pocket. She had carried it every day since escaping New Eden, but she had never put it back around her neck. Now, for the first time in over a year, she did. Not because she had returned to blind faith, not because she believed everything she once had, but because she had redefined what the cross meant to her. It was no longer a symbol of obedience or submission. It was a symbol of sacrifice, of carrying burdens for others, of laying down your life so that others might live. Ethan knocked softly and entered. He saw the cross around her neck and smiled. You're wearing it again. I am. But it means something different now. What does it mean? It means that sometimes you have to go through hell to understand heaven. That sometimes you have to be broken to become strong. That sometimes the faith you lose is replaced by something better, something real. And what's that? Hope. Not hope that someone will save you, but hope that you can save yourself and then help others do the same. Ethan crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. They stood like that for a long moment. Two people who had found each other in the darkness and had chosen to walk into the light together. The next morning brought another knock on the door, and the morning after that, and the morning after that. Women kept coming. Broken women, desperate women. Women who had heard whispers of a place in the mountains where you could be safe, where you could heal, where you could start again. And every single one was welcomed, fed, sheltered, healed. Mountain Haven grew. More buildings, more staff, more resources. It became a model. Other towns started similar sanctuaries. The movement spread, and at the center of it all was a woman who had once believed she was worth nothing, who had offered to sell herself for a warm bed, who had been told by a good man that she was worth everything. Claire Ashford had been saved not by faith or prayer or divine intervention. She had been saved by truth, by courage, by love, and by the simple act of one person standing up and saying, "This is wrong and I will not be silent." That was her legacy. That was what she would leave behind. Not a name carved in stone, but lives changed, women freed, hope restored. And in the end, that was more than enough. It was everything.